Hey all, and welcome back to the Old Iron Talk podcast. I'm your host, Callie Gurton, and today we have special guest Brian Baxter from Classic Tractor Fever. Let's crack a beer and get to chatting. Well, Brian, we'd like to thank you for joining us here today. We've got a few questions for you. We're kind of going to keep this light and just kind of discuss what you've been up to lately. Started with Classic Tractor Fever. So first off here, would you mind giving us a background on kind of where you grew up? Were you in a farming community? Did you grow up on a farm? What's kind of your background?
Hey, Callie, thanks for having me on the program. Yeah, I grew up actually in the Chicago area. I grew up in a western suburb of Chicago, not too far from O'Hare Airport. And actually, my dad worked for Sears, worked in the Sears Tower downtown Chicago back in the day, up on the 41st floor. So he wasn't even halfway up in the world's tallest building. But so my growing up years were in a suburban area. But my mom and dad both grew up on farms in Indiana. And so when I was growing up, my dad's father was already out of agriculture. He was older and had been a kind of a foreman for different farms around southern Indiana back in the day. And then my mom, she had grown up on a farm near Fort Wayne, Indiana, in Kendallville up in Noble County. And they had corn and soybeans and they raised sheep. Sheep was actually a big part of the income on the farm there in Kendallville. And that was part of the family when I was growing up. And so we would go to Easter weekends, we would go in the summers. And that was a big deal for us to go from the Chicago area and spend, a weekend or a week on the farm visiting with my aunt and uncle. And my uncle was still farming at that time. And, they had not actually upgraded the equipment in those days. And so they were still farming with the tractors that my grandfather had. And so that was just a super experience to be a part of agriculture in that way. Growing up in the city, but then having those visits on the weekend with family and out, in the cornfields and all the rest.
That is awesome. What kind of equipment did they use on the farm? Were they Farmall? What were they into? Olivers? What did they have?
My grandfather, the first tractor he had, I think, was a used Oliver in the 1930s, and I never saw that tractor. I only ever heard stories about it. He actually was born in the 1880s, so he was a lot older when I came along, and farmed with horses and mules for years and years and years. In fact, he left the farm in Indiana for a time, his family farm, when he was 20 years old. This was in 1906, and he went to California. And it was right after the earthquake in San Francisco, the big earthquake in San Francisco. And he got a job first picking up bricks after the earthquake when that city had been destroyed. And then he went to work on the Stanford farm. And we have old letters of his from when he was working on the Stanford farm at Stanford University, and running teams of horses and, harvesting wheat and all of those kinds of things. But he came back to Indiana and started his own farm, built a big barn in 1920 from timber that was sawed and hauled in from out on their property. And then again, had the Oliver tractor in the 1930s. And then much later, 1949, a tractor I knew was their 49 Farmall M. And that was on the farm when I was growing up, and that was a big deal. They thought about buying a brand new H, and then the more they looked at it, they wanted the additional power, the additional size, and they went ahead and bought a brand new Farmall M. And by that time, my uncle was old enough that he was farming alongside my grandfather. And then a couple of years later, they bought a 52 Ford 8N, and they bought that one used, probably about 25 or 30 miles from home. And by that time, my mom was old enough. She was 15 or 16. And it was a big deal for her because her dad said, well, you just drive this tractor all the way home. So she was the first one to drive that Ford 8N from wherever they bought it back home to the farm. And those were the two tractors that I knew growing up, was the Ford 8N and the Farmall M. And we would, of course, crawl all over them and then later learn to drive with those tractors.
I was going to say, I believe I read you farmed at one point with the M and a corn picker. Is that right at your farm?
Yeah, that's maybe a stretch. We would they had a tractor mounted corn picker for the Farmall M, and they used that right on up to the 70s. They weren't really able to expand and buy land and get bigger. And my uncle actually worked for Kraft, and so he had a full-time off the farm job, and then farming kind of became part-time. But so he stuck with the old equipment then on into the 70s and even into the early 80s. And so he had a Farmall M with a tractor mounted corn picker. I think it was a 4 row. We would ride in the wagon behind and have that ear corn come flying at us, you know. And then it got to the point where I was 15 or 16 and got to get behind the wheel of the M and take a few turns through the field picking that ear corn, just the way they had done it for, 20, 30, 40 years. Well, maybe not 40 years, but more than 20 years at that point. And certainly at that time in the middle 1970s, there was better combining technology, corn picking technology, and shelling and all of that kind of thing. But they would pick that ear corn, put it in the corn crib, and then haul it to town to have it, ground.
Well, that is an awesome background. I'm glad that you're able to share that with us, and that's cool that you have that history behind your family to share with people as well. Now, in hands with that, how did you get into the broadcasting world?
Well, when I went to college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but pretty quickly I started doing some radio disc jockey work at college at Indiana University, and then decided I really liked television, and so I started doing television production work and those kinds of things, and got a degree in radio and TV from Indiana. And then when I got out of college, I started working at a public TV station, and while I was working there, a brand new program called Ag Day, which is still on RFD TV today and also syndicated around the country, a daily farm news program that came into the facility where I was working. And within about a year, I was hired as a reporter and a writer for Ag Day, and did that for a couple of years. And then we started another program, sort of in competition, called the Morning Ag Report. And same thing, it was a half-hour daily news, agricultural news, markets, weather, feature stories on agriculture. And so I spent about 9 years as a TV farm broadcaster, traveling around the country, going to the Commodity Classic, what was called the Corn Classic back then, going to the National Cattlemen's Association convention, and just covering all kinds of stories in agriculture, both here in the U.S. and then even in the 1980s, we went to China and saw the market opportunity for U.S. grain to be exported to China. We did a trip there back when I was about 25, and China was really kind of the Wild West or the Wild East back then, and pretty primitive, but have been really all over the world, been to Egypt and Turkey and South America and those kinds of things, covering agriculture, both in the US and around the world.
That's awesome. Now, with Classic Tractor Fever, that started what, in 1997, I believe?
1997, Classic Tractor Fever was really actually the name, I have to give credit, came from John Harvey. John has passed away just a few years ago now, but he started something called the Classic Farm Tractors Calendar. And he was working for DuPont Agricultural Products, and they had a new soybean herbicide coming out called Classic. And the marketing people came to John and said, hey, we want to promote this soybean herbicide. This was probably in 1988 or 89. And they said, we really think classic cars are really cool. And maybe we can use classic cars as a way to market this soybean herbicide. Maybe we'll do a calendar, that kind of thing. And John talked to some friends and kind of thought it over. And he said, classic farm tractors are becoming a big deal. And they were already a big deal, but they were really kind of, that interest in that hobby was growing in the 1980s. And so John tweaked that idea and made the Classic Farm Tractors Calendar instead of a classic car calendar. And they used that starting in 1990. It was actually launched at the Farm Progress Show in September of '89. And then, it was the 1990 calendar. And that was the first time they featured 12 different tractors. And at that time, they actually filmed with not TV production, but with film stories on each of those tractors. So they had a VHS tape that went along with that calendar. So that was really the start of kind of John's involvement with classic farm tractors. Later on, he left DuPont. The herbicide actually doesn't exist anymore. It went by the wayside. But classic farm tractors, that classic farm tractor calendar kept on going. And John did it for more than 25 years. And so I knew John from having covered agriculture around the country. And as soon as I kind of heard about it, I always liked tractors. And I said, hey, John, if you ever want us to get involved, you let us know and we'd be glad to help. And so in 1997, he finally took me up on that offer. And we started a program called Classic Tractor Fever. And John and I worked on a logo together and kind of a concept for what the show would be like. And so, yeah, in February of 97, we launched Classic Tractor Fever, the TV show.
Okay. And what was like the first episode? Do you remember?
Yeah, at that time, we had a farm broadcaster named Ray Wilkinson from North Carolina. Ray has also passed on since then, but he was an older guy and he would talk with his hands. And if you said you're going to talk about Johnny Poppers, John Deere tractors, he would do this kind of stuff. But anyway, we hired Ray to host those first episodes. And the very first episode was one called Let's Go to a Tractor Show. And we had to have that on the air, I believe, in March of that year, 97. And so we were trying to figure out, well, how do we go out and shoot tractor stories? It's the middle of winter. So what we figured out was that we could go to the Florida Flywheeler Show and go down to Florida. That was our first trip to the Florida Flywheeler Show in Fort Meade, Florida. And so we gathered up a bunch of stories, including one of our first stories was not about a tractor, but it was about a bus that a tractor collector had painted green and cut so that he could haul a tractor on the back of it and made it into kind of an RV. So it looked for all the world like a John Deere bus. And that was one of our first stories. And then also at that show, we gathered a story about actually a tractor wedding. An older couple had gotten married. He was an Alice Chalmers collector. She was a John Deere collector. So it was kind of a mixed marriage. She rode in on a John Deere. He rode in on an Alice. As part of the vows, he had to promise to take care of her John Deere tractors. And so it was just a really neat experience to go to the Florida Flywheelers for that first time way back in 1997. And since then, we've been back to that show several times, and it's grown exponentially.
You see a lot of unusual things at tractor shows, no doubt about it. But you might be surprised to find that romance can also be on the agenda. At least it was when we visited the Florida Flywheelers and captured the unique story of Barbara and Jack. Cranking up a vintage Alice Chalmers tractor was probably tougher than getting these two lovebirds to get. But hold on. Some might say this happy couple has something to fight about. She's fond of John Deere's, drives her late husband's bright, shiny 1930 GP in parades, and Jack, well, he's a Major League Alice Chalmers collector.
My oldest one is 612 Alice Chalmers of 1918 or 1919. We don't know for sure. And then they range right on up into the Deutz Alice, which is in the 90s. And I have almost one of each model.
Even though they don't agree on which tractor nameplate is best, it hasn't slowed down their courtship. This is a match made at a tractor show.
We were at Zolfo Springs at a show, and I was going to get a T-shirt made. And what the T-shirt was going to say is, wanted a lady with AC tractor. Please send picture of tractor. So I got a picture of a John Deere tractor and got introduced to Barbara.
In fact, the president of our club was the one that was trying to get us together. And when he would call me about business, he would say, have you heard from Jack yet? And I said, no. And he'd get off the phone with me and call Byron, Illinois and say, Jack, why don't you call Barbara?
Caller, he finally did. And today they're together, ready for one of the most unusual weddings you will ever see.
We're getting married.
Yeah, we're going to be getting married, and I have met myself a very nice gal that loves to collect tractors also. The only problem that we're having so far is she has John Deere's and I have Alice Chalmers, but we'll work that out.
I'm wearing a square dance skirt that I made, and it's denim with white lace and some burgundy. No, it's not green. Although Jack doesn't know it, but I'll tell it here. I do have 2 John Deere buttons that I've sewed on the front of the dress. I have to get back at it.
The dueling tractor theme carries through everything, from the invitations.
We were looking for something a little different, and we knew we wanted to put tractors on the invitation.
To the wedding cake, their hats, even the chairs the tractor cross sweethearts relax on before the big day.
A friend of mine up north, he makes them. And so and then when I met Barbara, then I had one made for her for the John Deere.
Mine's a John Deere.
So we got to have our respective seats when we go to the show. So.
With the wedding party's tractor all primed, the big day arrived. First, they kicked up their heels with the pre-wedding square dance. And then the big moment. The crowd assembled. The groom rode in on his beloved Alice Chalmers and nervously awaiting his bride. But no worry, she loves him dearly.
Well, I think the greatest thing is going to be our vows, of course. But probably the most enjoyable thing is going to see the grandchildren coming in, and they kind of make the whole show, really. And then I guess really the heckling I'm going to take from all our friends, especially they're going to heckle me about being associated with a person that has a John Deere. So, but it's going to be delightful, I think.
And then those all-important vows. You know, to have and to hold from this day forward.
In sickness and in health. I promise to take care of your John Deere tractors.
Usually it's either 2 people that own John Deere get together, or 2 Alice Chalmers people, or international, or whatever they happen to be. So this is going to be just a little bit different.
He's going to drag my John Deere with him wherever we go.
By the authority vested in me under the laws of the state of Florida, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thank you so much.
Then pretty quickly we started doing stories about, tractors Dad had, and fathers and sons, and collecting together, or collecting the tractor that was part of the family history, those kinds of things.
That's awesome. Okay, I read about the Alaska Plow Day. Did you go to that?
I did. Yeah, that was another one that John Harvey came up with that idea. He had heard about this plow day that they did. There was a tractor club in Anchorage, Alaska, and each year they would do a big parade through Anchorage. And then in the spring, in May, they would do a plow day out at a place called Palmer, Alaska, just not too far from Anchorage, probably about an hour away. And there were some fields there, and there were mountains all around. And we went there and visited with collectors from around that area. I think we had about 100 tractors in the field, unbelievably, in Alaska, classic tractors, but a big John Deere was the one that was really the standout, and that's one of the ones we featured in the video we did from there.
Alaska. The name alone brings to mind a wintry wilderness of ancient glaciers and massive mountains. And although the largest state in our nation is known as the last frontier, it might also be called the land of the unexpected.
I'm Jim Fenton from Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm ready to go plowing.
Yep, who would think to find a classic John Deere 830 working a farm field just 40 miles or so northeast of Anchorage? Jim Fenton spent his working life driving big trucks through some of Alaska's most stunning scenery. But now it's this big old tractor that's his pride and joy.
I was raised on a little dairy farm in northwest Washington, and after I got tired of going to the end of 40 acres, and that was all the farther you could go, I started driving truck, and then after about 40 years of that, I decided, well, I better get me a tractor.
I think it's a fulfillment that, he came from a farm, So after he left there, he always wanted to have another tractor, and now he has it.
Jim's not the only one who loves John Deere Farm Power. His wife Ruthie is now president of the Antique Power Club of Alaska and a big fan of Big Green.
My husband has a John Deere 830, but that's my tractor. I'm real proud of it. I get a lot of comments when we drive it down the street. Do you like to see the inside too?
Sure, check out that interior. And you've got to see the engine too. Though it's clear Jim and Ruthie both love all things John Deere, their dachshund Rachel isn't so sure. Doggone, thought everybody in this family liked John Deere. Well, anyway, let's take a closer look at this 830 built in Waterloo, Iowa and sold new in 1960, the year after Alaska became a state.
Well, it was the biggest two-cylinder they made, and it was the last of the series. And after that tractor, then they come out with the 4010s and the 10 series 6-cylinder engines. And it's just a nice tractor. Well, the good thing about them, I mean, they didn't burn very much fuel. I mean, they done a lot of work for the amount of fuel they burned. This tractor's got fluid in the tires, and it weighs at least 12,500 pounds. Well, I like it because it's a standard tread tractor. It rides better. Got good sized fenders on it so the dirt isn't blowing on you. And I guess the sound has a lot to do with how you like it. I mean, it just sounds good.
The last of John Deere's long line of two-cylinder tractors, the 830 was equipped with a wide front end, power steering, a sturdy diesel engine, and nearly 70 horsepower at the drawbar.
Yeah, it feels, it pulls good. I mean, it don't die off on a hard pull, it just keeps pulling. Maybe a little smoke starts coming. It's good. I mean, it took them a long time after they quit building two cylinders to get the fuel economy back and what they're using today. I've got a block heater on this thing, but just in case I want to run it someday when I'm stupid and really cold, but it starts good. Anyhow, it just takes a little while to warm it up, so with the starting engine, but it gets warm.
Jim's 830 has been featured on the cover of Green magazine. He bought the tractor in Washington State and got the 777 six-bottom John Deere plow from a farmer in Nebraska.
I had an ad in the Green magazine wanting a plow, and he called and we talked. And when he hung up, I heard him, or just before he hung up, I heard him talking to his wife, and he says, "I thought I was calling Arkansas." And he says, "The phone bill will probably be more than I get for the plow." The moldboards had black paint on them, and when I started off in second gear, making the first pass, I was wondering what I bought, because I wouldn't hardly pull it. The paint on the muffler started burning, and finally I got the paint wore off, and then it pulled it pretty easy after that. But I didn't know if I'd bought too much plow or not.
No, it's not too much plow for the burly 830, at least not in the soils of Alaska's Matanuska Valley. And for Jim Fenton, a chance to plow with a farm tractor that's now more than 45 years old is a chance to relive farm life from days gone by.
You can see that you've done something. And it's just the old-fashioned way of farming, but that's the thing of the past nowadays.
But yeah, that was an amazing experience to look at the mountains of Alaska and to think about, you know, you wouldn't think in May that Alaska would be a place you'd want to be, especially, you know, plowing in a field. But it was a beautiful day. There were mosquitoes out. You had to kind of dodge mosquitoes and that kind of thing. And yeah, it was a great experience.
I bet that would be amazing to just go to Alaska in general. But for that would be so much fun.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break here. When we come back, we'll talk with Brian more about his journey and where Classic Tractor Fever is headed.
Hey, all of us at Classic Tractor Fever would like to take a minute to thank all of our viewers and subscribers. We've reached a big milestone, 100,000 YouTube subscribers and growing. If you're not a subscriber yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can keep the Classic Tractor stories rolling. Thanks again for catching Classic Tractor Fever.
Okay, and we're back. Brian, I've got another question for you here, kind of tying into what we were talking about with the Alaskan Plow Day. Do you have a top story from over the years since you've been doing this?
Well, it's pretty hard to narrow it down to one because we've done, usually we have anywhere from 4 to 6 stories in a show, and we've done 25 years worth of shows. And so that's, a few hundred tractor stories that we've done over the years. We have often had guys tearing up talking about the tractors that they've restored, the tractor that their dad had, and they found it came back home. So they're just amazing stories out there. But the one that stands out really for me is going to Big Sandy, Montana, and visiting with Randy and Robert Williams and taking a look at what was the Guinness Book of World Records, world's largest tractor, the Big Bud 747. Which is just a huge tractor. You look at a Big Bud that's smaller, like a 450 or a Big Bud 550, and you think, well, that's big, but I've seen big tractors, and that's kind of what I thought. I'd seen a couple of those tractors, I'd stood next to them, those kinds of things. But we went to Big Sandy, Montana, and got out there with that Big Bud 747, and it's so amazing. I mean, the wheels are 16 feet. They're just so huge. I rode along as they kind of chisel plowed in a field, and we videotaped that. And stepping outside the cab to shoot them in the cab, it was like you were on a patio. I mean, you could have set up a couple of lawn chairs just in the deck that was beside the cab, and then inside the cab, and the space that they had, how big that tractor is. I remember, I think it was Randy was looking at the tractor, and I said, what do you think about it now that you bought this, you brought it home? And they were using it. I mean, it wasn't just a collection. They were using it in the field. It would plow an acre a minute. And I said, what do you think of this, Randy? And he looked back and he went, right now, I think it's pretty awesome. Just thinking about it, I don't think we have a building we can put it in. So it's just working this huge acreage out in Montana, and really an effective tool for them. I mean, they bought it. This was 1999. It was built in 77, I think it was. So it was only 20 plus years old at that time. And for them, with all the wheat acreage that they had, all the plowing and the ground preparation they needed to do, the Big Bud 747 was actually a pretty smart choice for their farm. So, and on that trip, in addition to talking with Randy and Robert, who still own the tractor, it's back home now with new tires on it. But we also got to visit with Ron Harmon at Big Bud Equipment in Havre, Montana, and just stopped by and talked to Ron, and he just talked through the whole process of building that Big Bud tractor, the kind of 1.5 or 2-inch thick sheet metal that it was built from. The statistics on it are just amazing. We did a DVD out of that. And so it's a 16-cylinder Detroit diesel engine in that tractor. It's 900 plus horsepower. It's the biggest fuel injectors ever made. The whole tractor weighs 130,000 pounds. It's got a 1,000-gallon fuel tank, 1,000 gallons of fuel, pulls an 80-foot chisel plow, and can cover 60 or 70 acres in an hour. And so, yeah, tractor ever built, and that was just like an amazing story, and super nice guys. Randy and Robert Williams, I mean, salt of the earth, and just had a great day with them.
In the big state of Montana is a little town called Big Sandy. And at the foot of the Bears Paw Mountains, just outside Big Sandy, the world's biggest farm tractor has made its home.
It was in Guinness's Book of World Records as the largest farm tractor ever built. I think it still holds the record.
As far as we know, it's the largest tractor, and just because it's so heavy, it weighs 100,000 pounds, and the tires are like 8 feet tall and 40 inches wide, and it's just extremely large.
Brothers and lifelong farming partners, Randy and Robert Williams own this massive machine. It's the Big Bud 747, an awesome farm tractor that stands over 14 feet tall, carries 1,000 gallons of diesel fuel, and with a 16-cylinder turbo engine, delivers more than 900 horsepower.
We were looking for something that would go over a lot more ground faster. You know, we've got a real heavy schedule in the spring.
Covering ground is one thing this tractor will do. You're looking at an 80-foot wide cultivator that these full-time farmers use to prepare more than 12,000 acres of small grains each spring.
You can easily go out there and work between 50 and 60 acres an hour, which is an acre a minute. It burns, you know, anywhere from 3/4 to a gallon per acre of fuel.
Where other tractors would struggle, the Big Bud lugs this 80-foot rig up and down the rolling land of the Williams place with ease. In fact, Randy and Robert have worked more than 800 acres in a single day. On this beautiful day, Robert is the brother who gets to put the world's biggest tractor through its paces.
All right, now that we got it warmed up, we'll just kick her up a gear. It's about an 8-mile-an-hour gear here. Detroit's rated at 900 horsepower right now. Can be turned up to over 1,000 horsepower.
Other than its unprecedented power, the brothers like the Big Bud because in spite of its immense size, it's relatively easy to work on.
The cab, of course, folds back and the hood folds forward. And the hood you can take off very easily and pull the engine out. The engine's on a skid, so it's all hooked into one component, so you can take it out.
For us, the best feature is the fact that it's all component built. It's got a 16-cylinder Detroit 92 series, and those are easy to get parts for and to work on.
After they bought it, Randy and Robert worked hard to get the Big Bud back in field condition and looking good as new. Where did this tractor of incredible size get its start? A little farther north in Havre, Montana. Back in 1974, Ron Harmon, who now owns the big equipment company, bought the Big Bud tractor business.
Since then, we've built about 500 tractors, and they're located pretty much throughout the United States as well as some overseas.
You can still find lots of Big Buds around, some for sale right in Havre, and even one parked in a field after a hard day's work. But none as big as the one and only 747 that Ron Harmon and his crew built.
The Big Bud that we're looking at, the 16V 747 that was built in 1977, was the largest tractor built on the face of the earth. And to our knowledge, that's still the case today. We know of no other tractor that equals the size of this tractor.
Since it was first built, the biggest Big Bud has put in more than 8,000 hours of farm work.
The tractor was originally built for the Rossi brothers in Bakersfield, California, and it went on a large cotton farm, 10,000-acre cotton farm there.
After 11 years in California, the Big Bud spent time working Florida farm ground. Now it's back in Big Sky country, still earning its keep.
We're proud of the fact that it's not just a large tractor, but something that has produced and paid its way in its different applications over time.
Really, there's no doubt that it belongs here in Montana or in big fields somewhere, and we're really pretty excited the fact that it came home to Montana.
The 747's return hit the newspapers, and the baby Big Bud and its big brother are becoming tourist attractions.
Oh, they love it. We've had people, you know, the neighbors just are crazy about it, of course, and we've had people from all over the country and Europe out here looking it over.
But when they get here, you know, the first thing they say is, oh, it's a lot bigger than they ever thought it'd be, you know. And if you pull up another good-sized tractor alongside it, you can really tell that it's quite huge.
Check it out. Right in front of the Big Bud is a 400-horse tractor that just happens to be among the biggest cases ever built. But the Big Bud is still more than twice its size.
One thing you might notice is the thickness of the metal. Look at how thick, and of course, a lot of the weight of the tractor comes from the metal
Yep, the 1977 Big Bud 747 is simply one awesome tractor that will be working hard for the Williams brothers on into the new millennium.
It's a real workhorse. It's just what a person needs. You need something simple and big, and it'll work a lot of ground.
It's definitely going to be part of our life, I think, during our farming and while we're here farming.
Yeah, that's incredible. A Big Bud, yeah, I've never seen one in real life, but that would be an amazing tractor to see, let alone to see in action in the field. That's awesome.
Yeah, there's a few of them around the Midwest, but you can, if you get out to Montana, North Dakota, places like that, you can see them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, we've got one question we kind of ask everybody that we have on here. And you being involved with Classic Tractor Fever are a good person to ask. How do you see the younger generation impacting the hobby?
I think it's pretty amazing how many young people we see at shows. Young people that are just really into it. As we talk to people that watch Classic Tractor Fever on RFD TV or see our stories on YouTube, it's often 6 and 7-year-old kids that really are into tractors, and then sometimes they grow up and they're still into tractors. They get maybe distracted a little bit with sports sometimes, or other things in their life, but we go to tractor shows and we see lots of families, lots of young kids, young people who are doing amazing jobs restoring tractors. One of the privileges we've had in the last couple of years is to highlight winners of the Chevron Tractor Restoration Competition. That's the winners are announced at the time of the FFA convention each year in Indianapolis. But we've gone out and talked with the winners of that, winners and also competitors in that tractor restoration competition. Last summer, we went to San Luis Obispo, California, and visited with Annika Ernstrom, who now calls herself That Tractor Chick because she started restoring a couple tractors in high school. She's, I think, just barely turning 20 now, but she started her own tractor restoration business out of being a part of that competition. She was the national winner, got a $10,000 prize that she could use for scholarship or other things. She restored an Alice Chalmers WC and won that competition. Brian Holst from Almond Vintage Power is one of the judges for that. So he knows well all of those kids and everything that they do to make these tractors come back to life. And these kids, they learn so much. They learn not only the mechanics, but they also learn skills about how do you source parts, where do you go to find parts, how many people you have to talk to learn how the tractor worked and what it is you need to rebuild and who can I turn to, those kind. And so it's just a great experience. And I think, we're training up another generation of people with Classic Tractor Fever.
I agree. Yes. I know a lot of times you hear, I would say a majority of people say that they think it's going to die out with the younger generation, but I definitely agree, especially at shows and events. You see a lot of people interested and involved from all ages. So I think that's a good sign for sure. Okay, one thing that we feature on Old Iron Garage is we, in our database, have broken down the tractors by eras. And I wanted to ask you, Brian, while you were on here, do you have a favorite era of tractors?
That's another one that's hard to narrow down because there's something to like from every era. I probably have to say the 1940s. When you came out with when Farmall and International Harvester, 1939, they came out with the letter series tractors. So the A, the H, the B, the C, and then the Farmall M. And it's a Farmall M that's probably, the one that's most meaningful to me. My mom used to, even though she was long gone from the farm, she used to talk about that Farmall M, and she just had a real affinity and a loyalty to it, and I did as well. And to have the ability to drive that tractor and be around it, it was great. And so if I had to choose, I'd probably say the 1940s. You can make a case for the 50s and the 60s as well. The styling and the power of those tractors You know, they just kept making things better and better as they went along. And, you know, 50s and 60s, you get more into the muscle tractors. And the other neat thing that I like about that era, and it was true earlier as well, is you still had all those different nameplates. You had the Olivers, you had the Farmalls, you had the John Deeres, you had Minneapolis Moline, Alice Chalmers. You know, we're kind of narrow now with the number of different names that we have. Ford was big in the tractor business in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and before, obviously. But again, we're a little more narrow than we used to be, and to see all those different names in those eras, and it's just fascinating, really, to look at all the different brands and the styles that they would build.
It is, yeah. It's crazy to me. You've been to little old Nokomis, but even here, the history behind how many dealers used to be here, there were like 4 or 5 different tractor dealers. And yeah, like you said, to look at it now, it's a really niche market with how many there actually are left.
Right.
So that is crazy. Okay, well, a couple more questions here. We're getting close on our time, but what is ahead for Classic Tractor Fever?
Well, we have continued to try to be reinvigorating our show. We're always looking for stories. We had our crew out at Rolog, Minnesota last fall. And so we're just now finishing up a story on the Western Steam Threshers Association. That's going to be on at the end of April here in 2023. And what an amazing thing to look. That was a big Rumley Expo at that show. And so to look at Rumley trucks and Kerosene Annie, which came out of a museum in Boise, Idaho. It was in a glass case, didn't run for about 20 years. And the collectors fixed it up, and it was plowing at that show. And so that was a big deal. That's one of our new shows coming up. 2023, we're also going to go out and visit with some more winners or competitors in the Chevron Tractor Restoration Competition. We're heading to Maryland to visit the Tuckahoe Steam Engine Show out on the eastern shore of Maryland and take a look at some steam power there, as well as classic tractors. We'll gather stories and spin those out into different shows. And so, you know, 25 years we've been churning out tractor stories, and I don't think we're anywhere close to having told them all. There's plenty of tractors still to chase, plenty of collectors who still have great stories about tractors they've found restored or kept original. Just lots and lots of neat things to go out and do.
Yes, there is, for sure. All right, you got to tell us, how does someone know if they have Classic Tractor Fever?
Well, you know, if you can't look your wife in the eye when she asks how many tractors you have, you might have Classic Tractor Fever.
That's
if
a
you
good
built
answer.
another building just for your tractors, you might have Classic Tractor Fever. So yeah,
I like that.
There are lots of ways to do that.
Yes. Okay, can you let everybody know, besides airing each week on RFD, where else can they reach Classic Tractor Fever?
It's been really interesting to watch. Our Facebook page is really active. There are usually updates every day or two. We share lots of photos. We share videos of tractors plowing in the field. We share information about upcoming shows. We share information about Almond Vintage Power auctions and you know, some of the stories that come out of that, as well, you know, tractor school at Almond Vintage Power and those kinds of things. And so we have, I think, something like 150,000 followers on Facebook. So if people haven't connected with the Classic Tractor Fever page on Facebook yet, that's something they might think about doing. And then just recently, in the last month or so, we've gone over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. We share stories on YouTube every week, just kind of a taste of different stories that we've collected around the country. And so we have, like I say, about 100,000 plus subscribers on YouTube, still growing, still getting lots of interest and lots of great comments there. And then, of course, RFD TV, we're there each and every Saturday with shows. And we're always trying to highlight different shows around the country, promote them, and get out and get more stories so that we can make fresh content. Sometimes that's a little challenging, but we do our best to try to keep it fresh.
Well, Brian, we want to thank you for coming on today. It's been great talking with you. And we would like to probably invite you back another time to check back in throughout the 20 and 23 season. We're excited to see where Classic Tractor Fever is going and what you guys have in store. So thanks again for joining us.
All right. Thanks for catching Classic Tractor Fever.
Again, we would like to thank Brian for joining us today, and we encourage everyone to go check out ClassicTractorsTV.com. If you have a show or event coming up you would like to promote, contact us for information about ad space during our episodes. We also encourage you to submit your collection photos to info@oldirongarage.com to be featured at the end of our episodes. Old Iron Talk is now streaming everywhere you get your podcast, so don't forget to give us a follow. To connect with other collectors and hobbyists, please visit us at oldirongarage.com. Thanks for listening.